How much can you learn about tennis from a romance novel about two men falling in love? Honestly, a lot. If you haven't heard of The Open Era by Edward Schmidt, this was one of my favorite romances that I read this year. A lot of people assumed when this book was first announced that it was going to be Sinclair's fan fiction. And to be honest, when I first read the description, I thought, yeah, maybe. But I honestly don't think that that could be further from the truth of this book. This is not an established enemies to lovers situation where both of these rivals are on opposite sides of the draw and have been competing against each other for years. This is a book about a newcomer and an underdog named Austin. And the guy he ends up falling in love with is the top-ranked tennis player in the world, Diego Cruz. And one of the things that I think is really unique about this book, both from the tennis perspective, the US Open perspective, and from the kind of sports romance perspective in general, is that you have one player in this that is completely established and has everything to lose. But in your main character, Austin, who we stay with for the entire perspective of the book, you actually have someone who has played through qualifiers. If you're not familiar with how the US Open works, the top 100 or so ranked players in the world automatically get a slot in the main draw. But there are 128 slots available in the men's draw and in the women's draw. And 16 of them are fought for by players that are not in that top 100 ranking. Actually fight through a qualifying tournament for the first week. Austin actually makes his way into the tournament through qualifiers, which means that he has to win 3 matches in a row to actually earn his slot in the draw. This puts us in a completely different perspective than two players that are completely established. Instead, the main character that we're sticking with has a pretty good reason to believe that he doesn't belong there. He's had to really earn his spot all the way through and fought to be there. Whereas the guy that he's falling in love with, Diego, has everything to lose in terms of expectations, but also knows that he belongs where he is. And in a really interesting way, that belief that you belong is a really good point of tension in their relationship. And this book not only handles the idea of the US Open and a relationship between two players that are eventually going to meet in the draw if they both keep doing well, it also handles the idea of mental health in sports in a really great way. Austin has generalized anxiety, which means that he also has a number of episodes while he is playing. Getting through this tournament is not going to be easy, not just because he's kind of falling in love and because he's competing with people that definitely have better resources and intensity than him. It also means that he has to fight through his anxiety, which is absolutely triggered by tennis. And I loved how it ties into not only his relationship with tennis, but his relationship with Diego and trying to figure out what matters to him most. I think you will learn a lot about how the US Open works, and it will definitely get you into the mood for the US Open to watch starting this week. And even if you're not a tennis fan, I think this book will put you in the mood for it. And if you want to hear more from Edward Schmidt, the author, and what I thought about the book, and also a lot about tennis and the love of it, you can also listen to the episode of You Are What You Love, my podcast that I had Edward on. I highly recommend picking up this book. It is genuinely one of my favorite sports romances I read this year, and I read a lot. And let me know if you have read it and what you thought. We're doing a full US Open sports romance book club while the US Open runs, so be sure to follow along for the next recommendation.